Hey, Whappers, good evening, and welcome into our pre-comp review topic tonight, which is going to be on systems of government. This spans incredibly large topics, so I'm really going to focus it more on keeping it within kind of the era of world history where we've been dealing with, which is sort of the CE era. But some of the topics that I bring up are going to go backwards. I think one of the most important things, and this is going to lead us into conversation tomorrow, because we're going to focus on government a lot for the next couple of days and then after the pre-comp. I think one of the most important things that you guys learned with me earlier in the year in our review period from 6th grade is primarily the idea of bureaucracy. You know, bureaucracy is embedded in a lot of world history in terms of large, expansive empires. The empires were just so large for one person to rule, so oftentimes the power was distributed into different departments. Remember, the word bureau in French, bureau, it means desk. So think of it like a large desk. The government is a large desk. Each drawer holds something different, and that was the idea behind bureaucracy. If you really pinpoint, most of the governments are in the larger empires from early world history. Egypt functioned like a bureaucracy. Persia functioned as a bureaucracy. Alexander the Great's empires functioned like a bureaucracy. Rome, and so on and so on. Almost all the large empires in early world history that were focal points function as bureaucracies. The Chinese were expert bureaucrats. But with bureaucracy comes the need to fill those positions. And that's what's really fascinating in that the development of, let's say, the Chinese towards the civil service exams. The Chinese developed a system through their Confucian beliefs of selecting people to work for the government. And in Chinese culture, working in the government in a civil service job was one of the highest ranking positions in their society. Rome also, the Roman Empire, also adopted civil service exams. And so the idea of civil service exams diffused from China into places like Korea, but also as far away as Rome. Even in the Americas, the Inca Empire and the Aztec Empire somewhat function like a bureaucracy. Now, what often trips people up is the fact that in a bureaucracy, the power is distributed, but it is not shared, meaning there's still one ruler that has the majority of the power and is the ultimate shot caller. And that is true in places where you had a Roman Empire. In the Chinese empires, there was an emperor. In the Incas, there was the Sapa, and in the Aztecs, you had an emperor as well. So, again, I'm scattering things all over the globe here, but that's the point. You know, right? Bureaucracies exist all over the globe, and in these bureaucracies, they typically are tied directly to governments that are managing large territories. What's very interesting about the progression, though, of European history is that while places like the Chinese will continue to depend on bureaucracy, as the European nation states developed after the Middle Ages, France, England, Spain, Portugal, they shifted away from bureaucracy and worked more as absolute monarchies. And absolute monarchy is basically the idea that the king or the queen had total power. There was no second guessing. There was no, yes, they had advisors, but for the most part, the majority of European nations were absolute monarchies. And with those absolute monarchies is attached the idea of divine right. And that's the idea that effectively the ruling family in power was given their sort of position to rule via the heavens, and that God effectively has chosen that family. There go the lights again. It's always, I don't know what it is about WAP videos, always the lights going off. But God had given that family effectively the justification to rule. Absolute power is not an idea that was unlike other areas. I mean, bureaucracies could also have the idea of absolute power, like with the Native American empires in the Aztec and the Inca. But with European monarchs, they shifted away from bureaucracy, and really most of the power was solely within the king or the queen. Now, Britain is an anomaly, and we're really gonna focus on Britain tomorrow after we practice a good short answer question. And I want to end this off with Britain to remind you that Britain was different than their other European countries, primarily because under British law, the king and the queen had to seek advice from an organization known as Parliament. Now, Parliament was very much like and functioned very much like sort of a Congress in American government. But English Parliament, the evolution of getting into a parliament in England really goes back to the 1200s, the Middle Ages, when a sort of tyrannical king was forcing nobles to pay heavy taxes and making decisions about warfare without consulting the nobles. The nobles showed that in strength there is numbers, and the nobles banded together to force King John to sign what was known as the Magna Carta, a document that limited the power of the king only in the respect that the king had to seek counsel from Parliament on matters such as taxing and warfare. What the Magna Carta ultimately instituted was that dynamic in which the power of the king was somewhat checked by the Parliament. And ultimately, as English history, progressed, the relationship between the king or the queen and Parliament was quite important to keep maintaining order. And in that regard, all hell is going to break loose in England in the 1600s. And that's going to stem from the fact that one king in particular, Charles I, was going to totally usurp Parliament and almost cut Parliament out of some very important decision-making as he ran the British kingdom. And now their overseas empire, which was building thanks to colonization of the Americas and the British East India Company. So ultimately, England is going to find itself in a precarious position as a result of this relationship with Parliament. Other European monarchies, like Spain and Portugal and France, for example, didn't have a parliament. So therefore, England's situation is really unique. And we're going to look at how the tension between Parliament and the English crown became so high that England wound up going into a bloody, and I mean bloody, civil war, killing millions over the course of a couple decades. And the journey between, or the saga between Parliament and the king, plus the journey that occurred in England's revolution that occurred, is just one for the storybooks. And we'll get into that between tomorrow's class and probably a little bit on Friday as our final recap for the pre-comp. So I kept it very short tonight, really focusing on the idea of bureaucracies as a key form of government for you guys to be aware of for the pre-comp, but also talking about absolute monarchies and divine right. And that's going to tie into the relationship we talk about with the English monarchy and their struggle with Parliament starting tomorrow. So, Whappers, enjoy this one. Have a nice evening. We're at hump day here, so only a couple more days left of the week. As always, the past shapes the future. Go Bobcats. We got a basketball game tonight, and then we're home tomorrow against Bases Phoenix, 7 o'clock, so we'd love to have a lot of you 8th graders to come out and support us. Take care, everybody.